please drop in. Please drop in the most recent or the most frequent types of communication that you tend to do as your daily life. So when you are writing, what kinds of things do you guys typically write? Okay, so we've got memos, books, resumes, journaling, editing essays, and then email and text messages. So it looks like most of you guys write for professional reasons in your day-to-day life, and then a couple of you guys are editing professional writing from others. So I just kind of want to bookmark that for a moment before we go any further, email and training. So looks like electronic communication tends to be more frequent, business plans, that sort of thing. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a heart-stopping set of statistics. And this is out of date, unfortunately. When I say it's out of date, my suspicion is it's only gotten worse if the reports that I'm hearing in the news have been accurate in the wake of COVID learning loss. So before COVID hit, only 27% of middle and high school age students were meeting proficiency in writing on state tests. 27%. 67% of colleges require students to take remedial coursework in English before they can continue on with their college level coursework. And I want you to think about the fact that in most states, I know in Virginia, I'm not sure about North Carolina, you're taking an English class every single year of your educational career. So from kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade, you are required to take an English course. And after 12 years of learning, 67% of you are going to take remedial coursework to go into college level writing classes. Think about that. You've been studying something for 12 years and you have to take remedial courses. What's the probability that you are the reason you're taking remedial courses as opposed to the training that you've received, right? And that gets us to our next point. Fewer than 20% of teachers in a 2017 survey indicated that they had specialized coursework in writing instruction as part of their teacher prep program. So as an English teacher, we are tasked with teaching communication writ large. So reading, writing, oral communication, presentations, any form of communication, we're tasked with teaching it. But 20%, less than 20%, actually reported getting training on how to specifically teach writing. And the majority of the respondents who said they had some training in writing had it embedded in their reading coursework. And I can tell you what happens in an English classroom around the country. And that's not to say every English class, but it happens on a large basis. When we do teach writing, we teach it in the service of reading. So we teach our students to write a response to a text, as opposed to creating a piece of original writing for themselves. And we most frequently teach them to write the essay format. Now, we did have somebody in the chat respond that they edit essays, but it looks like we have memos, books, emails, resumes, journaling, business plans, client letters, flyers, marketing materials. You guys are not writing essays. No. And yet in high school for 12 years, well, not 12 years of high school, I hope you'd be a super senior, but for 12 years of schooling, you're learning predominantly the essay format. And then you go on to the real world and you don't write essays pretty much ever again, right? And for most of us, if we are writing something that sort of looks like an essay, it's probably a journal article or a blog or some sort of peer review report. So it's kind of like an essay, but it's not quite the same thing. So this is what we typically teach in school. And if you went to an American school in the last 30 or 40 years, you probably learned one of these two formats because most of us are teaching it. And I'm using the term us very deliberately here because I'm guilty of this myself, right? I did this for many years. When I was in high school, I learned the 5-paragraph essay. If you guys learned the 5-paragraph essay, you're familiar with it. It's this idea that there's an intro and a conclusion. And then there's 3 body paragraphs in your essay. So no matter what you write, there's 5 paragraphs, always, always, always. And I was taught that the intro and the conclusion are like triangles, as you see in this sample over here. And the intro starts out broad and then it gets very narrow. And then you have your body and then you have this narrow conclusion that broadens to some real world so what, which is conceptually not bad. But can you imagine if every single thing that you read followed that exact same structure for exactly 5 paragraphs? You'd probably put yourself to sleep on the 2nd or 3rd try. right? So then they started switching over to what we now call the hamburger style of writing, which is basically a 5-paragraph essay repackaged. You still have your intro and your conclusion. Those are the buns. The meat is the body. And then the toppings that you put on it are what differentiates the paragraphs, which you can see there's lettuce, tomato, and cheese, which gives you 3. You now have a 5-paragraph essay that just looks a little cuter, right? These were taught as scaffolds. So when you have emerging writers, they don't know what they're doing. You need to give them something. So you give them a scaffold so they can hold on to it. What happens, unfortunately, more often in education, and partly because many of us are not trained on how to teach writing, is that the scaffold becomes the structure. So instead of using the scaffold to build the writing, you're simply teaching students to build the scaffold. And so they build the scaffold and they build the scaffold and they build the scaffold, but there are no 5-paragraph essays in the real world. They don't exist. You might find an essay that's 5 paragraphs. You will not find a 5-paragraph essay. They only exist in academia because it's a structure, it's a scaffold. Oh, excuse me, it's a scaffold, not the structure. I got to college and I had my freshman college writing professor embarrass me to no end in front of the whole class because I submitted a 5-paragraph essay because that's what I had been taught. And he told me that the next time that I submitted such a sophomoric piece of drivel, I should just walk myself out of his classroom. And I had to teach myself how to get away from the 5-paragraph essay because nobody ever taught me. And then lo and behold, I end up back in schooling, teaching, and here we are teaching the 5-paragraph essay, and we have variations of it. We teach students that paragraphs have exactly 8 sentences, that they always begin with a topic sentence, that then you have your evidence and 2 pieces of commentary, and then another piece of evidence and 2 more pieces of commentary, and then a transition, every paragraph. Now, those of you who write emails, can you imagine writing 5 paragraphs in every email that you send, with each paragraph having 8 sentences that follows that sequence? How quickly would your reader say, why is this person sending me 5 paragraphs in an email? They're not going to read that, right? Or a marketing brochure that's 5 paragraphs. Can you imagine an Instagram caption that's 5 paragraphs? We know in the real world that that's not how we write, but that's the only way we're teaching our kids to write. And then we wonder why the kids are getting into remedial coursework in college. It's because they're not being taught to think. Writing is a thinking skill, right? It's a thinking skill, but we're not teaching it like a thinking skill. We're teaching it like a formula. At the end of the day, writing formulas don't work, right? They just don't work. So I had noticed in my classes, periodically, I'd been integrating some creative writing into my classes. And I discovered that when I integrated creative writing into my classes, my students came alive, right? They really wanted to come to life and do the work that we were teaching them to do. And when COVID hit, I knew that we needed to make a change. And I finally, oddly, had time to sit down and start making that change. So I wanted to make sure I was integrating creative writing into my classes, but I needed it to be tied to the core education strands. So creative writing for creative writing's sake is great, but it's not going to meet muster when it comes to getting the kids through their schooling. And so what I created ended up being my book, Artfulness, Formula-Free Creative Writing Explorations for Secondary ELA Classes. And it's a year's worth of creative writing lessons that are specifically designed to be taught in core English classes, not in creative writing classes, in core English classes. And each lesson is attached to one or more set of actual skills that are on our standards that we have to teach, so that educators understand that this isn't just a fun little detour that you do with your kids. This is something meaningful and important, and it does serve to prepare them for the coursework that they have to complete. It does serve to prepare them for the test, but it forces them to think. So now you're taking the burden off the teacher of saying, insert this word here, and forcing the children to have to think about what it is they want to say. And they rise to the challenge. They love it. They don't even realize that they're actually working. They think it's fun because it is fun, but it's meaningful fun. It's purposeful fun. And that was my goal. So that leads to the next question of why creative writing. And we touched on this a little bit. All writing is an act of creation, right? If you're writing your emails or your memos or your books, you are creating something, and you're creating it very deliberately in a particular format for a particular text, right? Or a particular audience. And so you have to think about what it is you're trying to do, and you have to make choices. Do I want this to be an Instagram post if I'm marketing? Do I want this to be a YouTube? What's the difference between Instagram and YouTube? If I'm sending a client an email, how is that different from when I'm sending the client a letter, right? And there are differences. And we're thinking about this all the time as we're writing. So even when we're writing for sort of professional, less creative purposes, we're using creation to think about what tasks we're doing. And so that's where creative writing ties in. We're using the sort of fun, engaging activities to challenge students to think about all the different contexts in which they're writing, so that they have to understand why they're making the choices that they're making. Writing also requires constant practice. It's not something that people are good. I mean, a lot of us say, oh, I'm not good at writing. How often are you writing, right? Writing is a skill. It's not a talent. Some people are talented writers, but anybody can learn to write, and anybody can learn to write well. You have to practice that skill. And so weekly writing forces the students to have to practice it regularly. Weekly writing for anybody, professionals, gets you practicing it regularly. You also want to write in more than one mode. So we've talked about emails and Instagram captions and YouTube videos and marketing blasts and business plans and proposals, right? In the real world, we write in lots of contexts. When we only teach students to write in one context, the essay, we're not teaching them all the stuff they actually need, right? And we're not teaching them the thing they're going to be using most often in the world. So teaching them to practice in lots of different modes where they can make mistakes. They can be inartful. They can have a page where they're like, well, that was terrible, right? But giving them the freedom to try something and make mistakes is what's going to help them figure out how to do better when it really counts. They love creative writing. They love being able to be given a voice as opposed to being told, this is what you will write. And it also helps them understand that writing process, how things get messy, how sometimes we have to circle back on an idea, how sometimes we have to throw out an idea altogether, right? And then finally, it is culturally responsive. And what I mean by that is every voice has an opportunity to write. Every voice has an opportunity to be heard, right? Instead of telling a student there's only one way to write, you're celebrating the students for their own voices, and you're giving them a chance to say what they want to write about or how they want to write it, or whether they want it to include images or not images. Some of my students are very artistic and they're always doodling in their margins, right? So creative writing allows them to be themselves, and it allows their voice to shine through. And that's what we want. We want to be different. We want everybody's voice to be different. Otherwise, it's just a lot of the same thing over and over. So it helps all students. It's by default differentiated instruction. So it meets all of our learners. So I'm just going to talk to you guys about what a sample lesson would look like. There's 20 in the book. And the first lesson in the book is called Express Yourself. And I love using this one at the beginning of the year because it's just a great way to kind of tap into students' identities in ways that they're really not expecting. They're used to the sort of standard icebreakers, but they don't get that here, because what they end up doing is I pick portrait art that's very unconventional, right? Things that maybe they haven't seen before. And I post it around the room, and I usually play some music that kind of gets them in the mood for whatever it is I'm trying to convey. And they walk around the room and they experience all the different portrait art that's out there. And then they select one and they spend some time making observations, taking notes, seeing what they see about it. In fact, the portrait At Eternity's Gate by Van Gogh, the far one on the right, I had students at the end of the year still referencing that as one of their favorite pieces, right? And then you have the picture of the two Fridas, where it's actually the same artist, Frida Kahlo, and she's representing herself two different ways. And I have about 7 or 8 different portraits around the room. So they look at the portraits and they see what these artists have done. And then they return to their desks and they get not a worksheet, but a sort of thought builder, right? It asks them to visualize themselves in a moment, or their idea of themselves, right? Are they sitting? Are they standing? Do they have their head in their hands? Are they kneeling? Are they laughing? Are they with other people? Are they concrete, or are they sort of abstract, right? So they have to kind of imagine that they were the painting. And that forces them to see parts of their identity that maybe they either don't think about all that often, or have never thought that they could show anybody, right? It moves beyond that sort of formulaic, tell me about your summer, or what's your favorite hobby. It lets them pick what they want to express, but it needs to be something that's sort of maybe a little quirky or unconventional, or just a new way of thinking. And then they just write. They write and they write and they write and they write. And most activities end with a reflection. This one, well, all activities end with a reflection. Most activities end with a share, where they meet with 3 or 4 people that they work with regularly. And they actually have to read out their pieces word for word. They can't just summarize it. They can't say, well, this is really bad. They just read it, right? It's all, everybody's is really bad. You're writing it in the moment. This one, I don't have them share out initially because it's usually the beginning of the year. They're not comfortable, but they get to that point where they will share. And what you're looking at here are pictures of my students as they worked through this activity. So the one on the left was taken on the second day of class. These kids didn't know each other. They didn't know me. They didn't know what they were doing. And you can see that they immediately gravitated towards each other. And you can actually see one of the students is pointing, right? He's pointing at the art. And they're actually engaging in this very detailed observation-based conversation that breaks the ice. They get to know their classmates, but it's not this weird, awkward kind of, getting to know you activity. They just sort of naturally did this. And you can see them engaging with it. Again, day 2 of classes. First day is go over the syllabus. Second day is usually continue to go over the syllabus, but here we were doing work. The middle picture is them writing, again, on day 2. Day 2 of class, all the students had their heads down, their pens up. They were writing, and after 70 minutes, I told them time was up. And they groaned because they wanted to keep writing. Day 2. And then the final day is them actually, we have celebration days at the end of the quarter, and they get to pick a piece as a team that they want to revise. And they make it live for the class. And you can see here that they are actually presenting it as a story. They created this whole great big narrative where they presented it as a story. And we do this every Wednesday. This is a sample of the reflection questions that they're asked to reflect on. And that reflective process is very important because it forces them to think consciously about the choices that they're making and how they can use those choices to craft their own writing pieces. So we always make sure that there's a reflection at the end. And this goes on for basically for the whole year. Any questions?
I have one. No, I'll mute it myself. Do you notice the simulation of the differences between being able, I commend you for your presentation, it's great. And the idea of at least five sentences in a paragraph when you're writing, that's great. In terms of these students and their responsiveness and warming toward expressing yourself on paper, and getting familiar with the subject matter, but you're forcing them to think through what they really want to say in a very chemical kind of way. I mean, how does the overall crowd, they just captivated to do it? They're excited about it. And what do you think, can you get further with them with that?
Yeah, so I can tell you that on day 2, I don't normally have students who are happy about writing, let alone unhappy about being told to stop writing. So that was actually an unexpected response that I witnessed. My kids ask for writing Wednesdays. If we have a reason, so last year I had a rule where every once in a while we'll have a 4-day week, like, if Labor Day is on the Monday, then we have a 4-day week. I won't do a writing Wednesday that week because we have alternating blocks. And so I try to keep them even. I don't know that I'm going to get away with that this year because I had students in November, we have lots of time off. And I had a student come in and she said, isn't today a Wednesday? Yeah. So aren't we going to be doing Wednesday writing? So they actually almost sort of demand the Wednesday writing. I had 3 boys who were working together. They were part of their writing team and they formed this little collection. They call themselves the Merry Gentlemen or something. And they literally bonded as writers. And every time I'd give them a task to do as a group, they'd make it 15 times more complicated than it needed to be because they wanted to make it better, right? So these are the kinds of activities where not only the kids enjoy it, and we're talking even the kids that don't like writing. The kids that don't like writing will write 2 or 3 pages. The kids who do like writing will write 8 pages. Normally in a classroom, a kid that does not like writing will write 0 pages, right? So, the ones who complain are, I don't like this, they still write 2 or 3 pages. They love this. And the response, I asked them at the end of the year, just very generically about the class. And the overwhelming majority of students reported a very positive